Hello and welcome to episode 251 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. It's been a while, hasn't it? So, this is going to be a crossover video episode thing where this will be episode 251 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, but will also be part 2 of my Agnès Vardathon, which is a marathon of Agnès Varda's films, which was initially just going to be me going through this Blu-ray set and talking about her movies, the great French filmmaker who sadly passed away at the beginning of this year, 2019. So part 1 of the Agnès Vardathon took place last summer in 2018. And that was a really special day because, again, I was really only thinking about going through the Blu-ray and watching her films and talking about them. But an opportunity came up to actually go into London to the BFI to see one of her films, The Beaches of Agnès, with her in attendance and giving an introduction to the film on stage and a Q&A afterwards. And I have talked about that in part 1, obviously, which will precede this part at some point when it becomes a full video to its own thing. But it was a great night, and it was almost like it couldn't be topped, and I never really felt like getting back to doing another part of this series in the immediate future. So it just was what it was, and I let it sit where it was because it was a really special night, a really special moment. And I remember thinking that day when I heard that, there's an Agnès Varda, Q&A screening going on tonight that I could go to if I wanted to. Hop on a train and go there. I thought, it's my day off, I don't really want to go anywhere. And then I thought to myself, you know what, I might regret it if I don't. And oh boy, would I have regretted it if I hadn't have gone, because of course Agnès left us the beginning of the year, I think. So 2019, she passed away, and it was a real bummer. And you would think that would be a great kind of point for me to celebrate her work and dive back into the series and watch some more of the films in the box set. But I was just too bummed out to even think about it. It was a real shame. 90 years old. I'm not sure if she hit her 91st birthday or not. I just felt like, and when I saw her last year, 90 years old, she had so much spirit and kind of liveliness and awareness that I just thought that she was going to live forever. I was expecting her fully to be like 130 and making weird experimental films. But, it was what it was. She lived an incredibly full life. And I'm so glad to have seen her films at the point that I did, to kind of discover them, to fall in love with them, to get really excited about them like I did when I first saw The Gleaners and I, which was an Epic Film Challenge 2 episode in the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. That took me on the Agnès Varda path. So if anything, with this whole 1001 Movies series, I have to thank is getting me into certain directors, including Agnès, to the point where I was a fan and went to go and see her in person, and that's something that will stay with me forever as a film fan. So part 2 comes about with the film Vagabond from 1988. 1988, why did I say that? It's probably because that's the year of my birth. No, I'll leave that one in for free. The year 1985, actually, 3 years before my birth and arrival to the world itself proper. 1985, the film Vagabond, I believe the original title, which I can't say in French, is translated in English to No Roof and No Law. So it is this woman who is without kind of a home and doesn't abide to any rules, laws, or anything of that sort. So how did this come about? To kind of tie in with the Agnès Vardathon and my experience with part 1 last year and going to see her film at the BFI. Well, this time it was another special occasion that kind of drew me back to Agnès and brought me back to watching her films and her work. There's a cinema in my hometown nearby, which is on a pier. It's now called the Snowcat Cinema. I believe it just used to be called the Pavilion Cinema. They've gone through a couple of management changes. I'm glad they're still going because it seemed touch and go for a while. And they're showing a lot more older films, in recent months, which I thought was really cool. Hadn't got back there it's been a few years since I've been there. And I saw that they were screening Vagabond. I thought, oh wow, an Agnès Varda film in the cinema. And it's a small little screening room. It's not like a huge screen, but it's a nice kind of experience. And so I thought, okay, I finish work about an hour before this thing starts. I can go home, get changed, and just about get down to the beach to see this film. So I did. I went alone and had a really good time watching this film in a very small room with about 10 or 15 people who you know, were laughing a lot during one particular scene, and at the end there was a little, you know, a few sniffles at the end, a bit of emotion. And going down, you know, the kind of the weather was perfect, just beautiful day, like the sun was shining, not too hot, nice breeze, you know, by the beach, by the sea. Go into the cinema, watch this great film, which has a real somber tone to it by the end, and to leave then, the sun's gone down, and there's kind of a nice cool breeze, it's kind of a bit more melancholy. I just stood by the edge of the pier and just watched the sea and the waves roll in for a while and kind of just reflected on the film. So that was a great experience, and made another part of this Agnès Vardathon really special. But the film itself, Vagabond, follows a character known as Mona, who is played by Sandrine Bonnaire, who is a wanderer. She's a vagabond, a vagrant, she's homeless, and the film follows her on her adventures, basically. We see her walking across the countryside of France and the people that she interacts with on a daily basis, the jobs that she gets, and the places where she stays, whether it's in her tent that she carries around with her, whether it's in, you know, certain places where she joins groups of people who are homeless and they kind of squat in abandoned buildings and things like that, whether she kind of partners up with men and kind of stays with them for a while, and then she moves on to kind of the next adventure. The film reminds me of Grave of the Fireflies in that I can't even say spoilers, because right up on Front Street the movie opens with her dead. You know, we see her dead body found in a ditch, and the film then goes back and retraces her steps in the months leading up to her death. So it's this idea of seeing this young homeless person dead, frozen to death in a ditch, and then piecing together what happened to her before this. And the film is actually playing around with a documentary style, where we're seeing characters like interviewed about their experiences meeting Mona, the impressions they got from her. And it could be as involved as a character who has scenes throughout the entire film, and there's like an overarching narrative to their character. Or it can be as simple as Mona walking across to a building site, sitting down next to a fire, and there's a builder who looks across and sees her, and then he gets interviewed and says, yeah, she kind of came in and sat down and I wish I'd said something to her. And that's it, you know, there's these little mini moments. I mean, the film is made up of these mini moments, but there's varying degrees of the accounts of this woman who is wandering, not even the streets, but wandering the country. And at first, I wasn't sure if I liked this film. I had heard a lot of good things about it. I love Agnès. That there hasn't really been a film of hers I've seen yet that I haven't really liked. And so I was expecting to kind of love this film. But the first like 20-30 minutes, there's a lot of fading out. And I just, as the perfectionist editor in me, in my brain was like, it's kind of, I didn't like the way that it was cut in the first 20-30 minutes. Just certain things didn't sit right with me. But soon, so soon, I all that melted away, and all that was left was in clear focus this great character of Mona, because she's so, I can't even think of a word to describe Mona as a character. She's just so, she's just so, you know. I got so drawn in by the performer, blistering performance by Bonnaire. She just inhabits the role completely. I believe every single second of her on screen that I see, whether she's scared, whether she's upset, whether she's rebellious, whether she is completely nonchalant, you know, whether she's cold, whether she's hungry, whether she's enjoying music, whether she's completely drunk out of her mind or high on drugs and loving life. I believe every single section of that performance makes up this complete character that is, you know, she carries the entire film. The whole film is about her. There are a few scenes that she's not in when we're looking at other people kind of talking about how they feel about her, but you know, she really carries the entire film and does an incredible job. I was stunned, absolutely floored, to hear that she was 17 years old when she made this film. I thought she was in her mid to late 20s. Now that I think about it, if I look at it, yeah, maybe she is kind of a bit younger than that. Both in the way that she looks and in the way that she acts. There's this kind of playfulness and kind of almost childishness to her at times that feels like a 17-year-old, but it just really shocked me. But I think the way that she dresses, the way she carries herself, she's so self-assured. I think it makes her feel and seem a lot older than she actually is. And I could just talk about the film all day. I really did end up loving it, and the more I thought about it, the more I loved it. There's a great feature on the Blu-ray, which is a 40-minute documentary of Agnès returning to locations from the film like 20 years later, interviewing a lot of the key performers in the film, even going back and finding people who she got to act in the film who weren't actors. They're just real people that Agnès met when she was traveling around France researching this project and kind of finding out these certain things and putting that into the movie. There are a couple of characters in the film. One is a farmer who used to be a kind of philosopher. He had a degree, I think, in philosophy, and he turned his back on that and went to the country just to farm. And that was an actual person that Agnès met, and she said, "Can you now tell me everything you've just told me, but to a camera and in the guise of being a kind of a character in this movie?" And he agreed. And another character in the film is this Tunisian man who kind of works in these vineyards or vineyards. I don't know how you pronounce that, where he's kind of clipping these vines and things. And Mona joins him for a period and stays with him because he usually works with Moroccans who are away visiting home, and so he has room for Mona to stay with him. And that's actually the only time in the film where Mona stays with someone and doesn't really want to leave when the time is up, basically. He says to her, when the Moroccans come back, I'll convince them to let you stay and work with us. And as soon as they turn up, he folds completely and says, "You gotta go, they don't agree. I'll see what I can do." He goes and speaks to them, he's back in like 10 seconds. "Yep, you gotta leave, sorry." And she's really upset about this, she's really distressed, and for the most part, she is this person who doesn't stay in one place for very long. She doesn't stay with the same person for very long. She isn't looking for attachment. She isn't looking for relationships. But with him, it was such a tender kind of friendship that developed between them that her kind of scorn that he was being a coward and just folding to the Moroccans and saying, "Look, you got to go. They don't want you here. I can't convince them." That was a really powerful part of the film, and I think that really signals the beginning of the end for Mona, because I think she was finally starting to let her guard down and maybe kind of have feelings for someone, or at least have feelings for something other than what she was doing, which was just roaming. And just when she started to feel like she could have a settled existence, at least for a moment, it gets taken away from her, and she's kind of really devastated by that, and then just picks herself back up and keeps on moving. And eventually she just declines, drinks a bit too much, falls in with the wrong crowd, and then ends up really with very little, and is unable to kind of protect herself in the harsh kind of cold that develops. And you think about that with homeless people and how they must deal with it as the seasons change and things like that. There's one thing the film doesn't seem to really dwell on that much, is the idea of homelessness. Even though it really is shining a light on that in a big way, because we see a lot of characters who are homeless, but the character of Mona is doing this by choice. She hasn't experienced poverty and kind of has been cast out or anything like that, at least as far as we know. The way she's portrayed is that this is her choice. She wants the freedom. She doesn't want to adhere to any rules, any laws, and be completely and utterly free. And we see the other characters throughout the film who see her and they're in awe of her, and in awe of her freedom. They want what she has. They want to be completely untethered from all of their responsibilities, just like she is. She can walk out with her tent and she can sleep wherever she wants, but that comes at a price, and it comes with consequences, ultimately her death, which is an unfortunate thing as an accident, but there's moments where she kind of gets preyed on, and that isn't shied away from. It's a very heartbreaking film. It's a heart-wrenching film, really, by the end. Knowing the inevitability of her death really gives the whole film an even bigger mood, and it charges a lot of the scenes in the film when you know that she isn't going to make it. There's a scene, I won't go into the details, where it seems like she might be able to be quote-unquote saved. She's at a real bad spot in a train station, and there's a guy who sees her, and he knows someone who wants to help her desperately, but he decides not to tell them because he sees her drunk and thinks she's a mess, and it's just embarrassing to him. And he's on the phone, and I'm thinking, just tell this woman, because if you do this, she can be saved and she won't die. Even though I know in my head that she will die because I've seen it happen, I still feel myself wanting her to survive, and that, I think, is the mark of a great storyteller and a great performer who can take a character who we are told at the beginning of the movie dies and you root for them to survive, even though you know that is an impossibility. That, I think, is the biggest achievement of the film. It's really remarkable in that sense, and there's so many things I could talk about. I love how after she meets someone later on in the film, we'll see an interview clip with them talking about how they feel or how they felt about her now that she's not in their lives anymore, kind of thing. And we get one of those scenes, one of those clips from the Tunisian, who, when Mona stayed with him, he gave her this red scarf, which she kind of promptly throws back in his face when he tells her she has to leave. And his moments of reflection on Mona is simply looking into the camera, holding up the red scarf and kind of gently smelling it, and then looking into the camera, and then it fades out. That's it. There's no dialogue. You don't need to. You know exactly how he's feeling. And it was one of those moments where I kind of go into director mode a little bit, and as he smells the scarf, in my head, in the moment, I was like, don't say anything, don't say anything, just leave it at that, it's perfect. And that's what happened, and I was like, oh, that was just, it was beautiful, it really, really was. And I'm not trying to say that in a way where I'm like, oh, I knew the right thing to do, no, but I just had this feeling that it would have worked so well with no dialogue, because I already knew what he was feeling just by the way he was carrying out this action. And in the documentary, she goes back to the same farm, or the same vineyard location, and she's speaking to some of the locals, and she says, is that Tunisian man still here? They're like, yeah, he's just down here. And she meets him after like 20 years. It's this amazing thing. I loved the making of documentary. Just brilliant stuff, and I might talk about that down the line maybe in another video or something, but really, really cool stuff. There is a number of sequences in the film where Mona is walking from right to left on screen. I don't know how that translates to how you're watching this video, but she walks from one direction to the other, and there's 12 shots of those throughout the film. And there are these linking visual ideas, like one shot she's walking across a field, and then the camera moves past her and stops on a tractor. The next walking shot starts with a tractor, and then she walks in front of it. And it's not the same tractor, it's not even the same angle, but there are these different linking ideas as the walk continues throughout the film. And there's a special feature that presents all of the walking scenes in one kind of, in one cut, which Agnès says, you know, in the introduction, this might seem a bit heavy-handed, but I wanted to present it along with the music that was composed for each of those sections. So I love those visual ideas. I think that I had kind of thought a little bit in my head as I was watching them, like, didn't we already see a tractor? So it was kind of like a subconscious thing in my head. The main thing that I love about the film, apart from how well it works as a whole, is the sequence with the old woman. This to me is one of the most joyful and fun scenes I've ever seen in a film. I think it's going to go down as one of my favorite scenes of all time. To try and sum it up very quickly, we have a very old woman who has a maid, and the maid is kind of enamored with Mona when she sees her and wants her kind of freedom, as I was mentioning. And the maid sees Mona later on in the film and brings her back to the house where she looks after the old woman. And she leaves for a while, and Mona is looking down the hall to see this old woman who's a little bit blind, and Mona puts on the maid's apron and walks in and kind of pretends to be the maid. And she's playing around and stuff. She picks up a bottle of brandy, and the old woman's like speaking to her. And then the old woman, Liddy, I believe was her name, she comes up close to Mona, and then she sees her, and she's like, you're not Yolande, or whatever her name was, and she's very shocked. And what you might kind of think would be a scene where the old woman gets really angry and says, get out of my house, I don't know who you are. Instead, she sits down and has a drink with Mona. And so they're there drinking brandy, and this old woman is such a character, and she has such an infectious laugh. And they're drinking and stuff, and the old woman's joking about how, oh yeah, I know that my nephew just wants me to die so he can get the house and stuff. And they're drinking and laughing, and it's just so infectious, and you can tell that they cross over to the point of pretending to laugh and actually laughing, and they both crack up. And just seeing this, you know, 17-year-old and this, she must be like at least in her 80s, if not like early 90s, just pissing themselves laughing, you know, in the scene drunk, but it comes across as such a human moment, because you can tell that crosses over into reality, and they're really, they can't stop laughing, and it is so fun. Everyone in the cinema was really laughing, and that was infectious as well. And it was to the point where after the scene had ended, people in the cinema were still laughing out loud just thinking about this scene. It was wonderful. I love that scene so much. It's just a beautiful, again, human moment of people just laughing, and sometimes that's all you need to make movie magic, and that to me is movie magic. The film, is it a film you should see before you die? I absolutely think it is. The more I think about it, the more I've looked into the behind the scenes and the making of that Agnès made. I just love it, and there's beautiful shots of the countryside that just kind of, you know, we place Mona in this landscape and we see the enormity of this, you know, everything is kind of in a way at her oyster, but at the same time there's a lot kind of for her to overcome in living this way, and you see that in kind of the huge landscapes that we sometimes see her crossing. Sometimes it isn't, sometimes it's streets and things are very enclosed at the same time, but we do get these shots in the beginning of the film when we first pan in to see where she died. It's this amazing location that looks like it's a painting that someone came up with in their head. It's this field, and there's some farming going on, but in the background there's this kind of hillock with these two lone trees. It's a beautiful location, and in the making of, Agnès says that it almost is like this kind of, you know, temporary kind of monument to this girl's death, because where she dies is right next to these two trees. Well, not right next to, but you can see it in the background when the police arrive and they're looking at her body. It's just an amazing looking, you know, wonder of nature, I think. I mean, it's not this huge, massive thing, but it's just this random kind of really cool little location that she found and used in the film. So, you know, there's a lot going on visually like that, but really it breaks down to the character of Mona. And Agnès even met with a lot of homeless people, including this homeless woman who was very inspirational to her and probably informed the character of Mona as well, and she actually appears in the film as well. So she's kind of the real life Mona in the film as a character in a few scenes. But I could really talk about the film a lot more because I really thought it was fantastic, and it's not one I'm going to go back to again and again because it really takes a toll. You know, you grow to kind of really love this character, this woman, and want her to do better and want her to, you know, maybe not be as stubborn in wanting all this freedom, and that it's burning her too much, you know, and ultimately that comes at a price, and that price is her very untimely death. But you know, again, the film ends with her dying. Like, that is the final moment, and it was just silence in the cinema. And I think no one left until the credits had completely finished rolling, and that was really nice. You know, I don't know, I just think the film is brilliant. You know, and again, going into the behind the scenes, thinking about it, sitting here talking about it, I love it even more. I hope it holds up when I watch it again, I really do. And that is also other things I haven't talked about, like the character who plays the tree specialist, who is a really interesting character who doesn't really help Mona because, you know, she doesn't take her in and says to her, look, I can't take you in. She's well off. She could easily take Mona in, but she doesn't want to. But she'll entertain her and say, this dirty, stinky girl is kind of interesting to me, so I'll buy her some champagne and I'll let her sit in my car and listen to the radio, and we'll hang out and stuff. But eventually she tells her to go on your way. And she regrets that later on. There's this scene where she gets electrocuted by her bathroom lights, and she says to her kind of friend, I saw my life flash before my eyes in images, and I kept seeing that homeless girl. I need to find her and help her, and she never gets to, because, you know, and that's another thing you can look into, is the things you maybe should have done but didn't. And maybe if there are people out there who choose to do things that they think to themselves, oh, maybe I shouldn't, they might help someone who, and that chain of events could stop someone from, you know, going down a really dark path like Mona does. So I think that's part of the film too, is the things that we choose not to do when we see people like that. Because you see people who embrace Mona for who she is, and there are people who are repelled by her at the same time. But for the most part, people do tend to look at her and they're really kind of wowed by the freedom that she has. But there are people who take advantage of her as well. But she is very much her own woman, and she does what she wants, and she is not a victim, which I think is great. And another thing I wanted to touch on was the way we see Mona kind of degrade as the film goes on, the deterioration of kind of her physical state. Her teeth kind of get stained and discolored throughout the film, and it's really well done in that kind of the way that it progresses, again moving towards her kind of untimely end. But even down to like her jacket zipper breaking, her boots, which she tries to fix throughout the film, but they continue to fall apart until near the end of the film. They're just hanging by her feet, completely in ruins, and there's really nothing she can do about it. And it adds to the building sense that we're moving towards the end, and that she's kind of moving towards the end, and everything is kind of being stripped away from her, and it's really sad, but it's really well done, the way that the kind of costume design and having the different kind of sets of boots to kind of show the progression and everything like that, and even the makeup on the teeth, because I think when you see people's teeth and it looks all discolored and stained, you get that kind of impression that they don't really have, you know, good personal hygiene, they're not taking care of themselves, and that also kind of highlights how Mona is really just so on this road of freedom that she's not really taking care of herself properly, and that could be another factor that really plays into the way she ends up. And by the end of the film, she really is in quite a state. So, but that's all done very well, and just again heightens her journey, I think. But yeah, I absolutely think it is a film you should see before you die, and it's one that as long as I have kind of time to kind of prepare myself for it, I will definitely go back to it again and again. I think Agnès is just an incredible director, and I'm really sad that we've lost her, but man, I'm so excited that there's still many of her films I haven't seen yet, and I think this might be the best film of hers that I've seen, for sure. Now that I'm sitting on it after a few days, I went to see the film about 3 or 4 days ago, and I've really thought about it. It just gets better the more I think about it. So yeah, Vagabond, incredible film. Loved watching it, loved talking about it. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts down below. If you haven't, please watch it, and I'll see you in the next one.